The Eagles just lost Jalen Phillips to a massive $120 million deal with the Panthers, a huge hit to their pass rush. But here's the thing, they may already have their next game changing rusher lined up, a player who could step in, shake up the defense, and keep Philly's front elite. Today, we're breaking down exactly who the Birds are targeting, why they make sense for this team, and what it could mean for the season ahead. Stick around, you're going to want to see this.
Crosby would absolutely be considered a Philly fit. I mean, he has a relentless motor, an elite pressure rate, durability. His ability to rush every down just aligns perfectly with the way Philadelphia's, philosophy of building their defense through disruptive pressure. He wins with effort, length. He just has the traits Philadelphia values, and he would thrive in the Eagles' attacking front. And just imagining him next to Jalen Carter just seems like a dream right there. But the big question with him is compensation, especially after, what happened to Baltimore. And some can blame it on the knee, but most of that stuff with the knee was already known. I don't know what else they could have had happen in Baltimore other than buyer's remorse, but whatever it was, you're never going to know the truth with that. It'll be confidential. I think it all comes down to compensation with him. If the price has gone significantly lower, but because of this, I'd be a little surprised. The Raiders would have just be eating a lot of crap having to do that. That's hard to imagine them doing. But on a 2 or 3 year guaranteed deal, he's a safe gamble that could pay huge dividends. The high risk, high reward swing that Howie normally benefits from. I mean, you've seen him do it in the draft by selecting Jalen Carter, Landon Dickerson, Nakobe Dean, all with their own issues, whether it be injury or character concerns. And they've all paid off. So I think that would be a really good gamble. But in my opinion, the more likely one is Jonathan Greenard trading with him for the Vikings. I don't think he would command quite as much money. It seems like he's still wanting to be in that, somewhere between 22 to 27 million a year range. But he's a really good player. And a lot of people will look at the sacks because I believe he had 12 and a half in 23 and 24. And then it may have dropped all the way down to 3 last year, but his pressure rates and everything were still the same, which to me just tells the bigger story. I mean, his traits are everything the Eagles look for: speed to power rusher, strong hand usage, high effort, good defender on the edge, even though, at 258.9, he might be a little light there. But he's just a pressure generator, and I just love that, the violent hands and all. And if you're going to try to come up with the comp, Brian and I mentioned it earlier, I think one of them is Brandon Graham himself. He's built a career on that exact formula. While Graham's sack totals have fluctuated over the years, if you look at his, back of a football card, his pressure rate and disruptions haven't. And he consistently was among the best on the, Eagles defensive front. And Greenard just plays in a, very similar way. He's not a classic, like wide 9 speed guy, but he's just extremely effective converting, speed to power, and his burst tackles through chests, force quarterbacks off their spots. And for just another small little comp, I think Chris Long is kind of a, comp there as well. Again, his game just resembles to me more of a just younger Brandon Graham, but just a high motor, wins with leverage, hands, and that speed to power blend. But if he costs a 3rd round pick, or maybe, whatever pick they have this year, number 64 or something like that, whatever it is, and that's what the Vikings want because they're kind of a little light in 2026 draft cap as far as high end, picks. I think it would be a really good move, and they got to do something because losing Jalen Phillips leaves a big, big hole.
I completely agree. There's going to be a huge void on the defensive line now that we don't have Jalen Phillips. And you mentioned great things about Jonathan Greenard. I think the key takeaway is his pressure rates and his consistency, and also his durability. But Corey, I want to pick your brain. How does Maxx Crosby fit the Fangio scheme and what the Eagles want to do going forward?
I mean, this guy is a relentless pass rusher. You look at his stats, they speak for themselves. He had 10 sacks this year, and he was dealing with that meniscus injury. He ended up missing the last 2 games of the season, and he was playing through it. 4 of his 7 seasons, he's had double-digit sacks. So I think regardless of who's the defensive coordinator, you're going to plug and play Maxx Crosby, a 5-time Pro Bowler, and he's one of the best to ever do it. So does Howie Roseman pivot to Maxx Crosby? Possibly. I believe there was a report out that the GM says now the plan is to keep him on the team. They have a lot of cap space. I know they just signed like 4 or 5 guys to $50 million contracts, something the Raiders haven't done historically ever. So maybe they just take a step back and say, let's just deal with this. I mean, I don't know if they're going to get the value that they want out of Maxx Crosby. I don't think the Eagles will be willing to trade away 2 first-round picks like the Ravens did. They have too many holes, but if that's their firm asking price, like Howie has a firm asking price with A.J. Brown, then I think Crosby is more of a pipe dream than a reality for Philadelphia right now. I agree with David. I think Greenard is the more likely candidate to come over here. He is going to want a new deal. I believe there's 2 years left on his current contract. So there is some wiggle room there. And if the ABV is what David said he thinks it is, or where the estimates are, that's probably where they were looking to sign Jalen Phillips, right? I mean, that was where everybody thought Phillips's market was. And then Carolina just swooped in and overpaid and gave the guy $30 million. I just don't think he was a $30 million player. So I think if they're able to get Greenard, I think he'd be a great fit. I watched a little bit of his highlights earlier today, and the dude's a menace. David mentioned his pressure rate is still there, even though the sacks were down. Injuries are a little bit of a concern for him. If you look at historically what he's been going through, he did play a full season 2 years ago where he was a Pro Bowl selection, played 15 games in 23, missed a bulk of 2022, played 12 games in 2021. So he hasn't really played a full season aside from that 24 season. I think that the Eagles need to zero in on an edge rusher, and he seems to be the best guy available who is also potentially on the block.
And it's kind of tough, right? Because Greenard is not a bad player at all. It's not a bad pickup. And I hate the fact that people are going to feel like this is like the plan C option or plan D option, whatever case may be, because Crosby's out there, and Crosby, is the cream of the crop, and it's every Eagles fan's pipe dream is to land a guy like Crosby. And I was talking to David earlier in the day, and I'm like, it would be such a menacing of a defensive line if we had Crosby, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Jalen Hunt, Nolan Smith, and Brandon Graham. Like that's a very, very good defensive line. But I do agree with you where it may not be in the Eagles' interest to trade away such high capital unless the Raiders are willing to budge. And a key note out there is the Raiders GM alluded to the fact that Howie is his mentor. They're very close friends still. So I can only imagine what that conversation is like, maybe a little blackmail going back and forth to get Crosby to Philadelphia. You feel like the Eagles could have a chance to make something big happen with him?
I do think they have a chance with them. I mean, if the Raiders wanted, I don't know how else to word it other than say just kind of do right by Maxx Crosby. I mean, having to force them, a player of that magnitude, to go through a 2-year rebuild basically for what they're going to be doing. I mean, they have zero to little chance of, making the playoffs, especially this year. I mean, nobody can predict the future, but they are an awfully young team, with aspirations to be a contender in 2-3 seasons, not this year. And if they want to do right by him, yeah, he could come to Philly. And in my opinion, if the Eagles are willing to spend as much as they were for Jalen Phillips, I don't think that would be the problem with Maxx Crosby either. I mean, if you look at their injury histories, Jalen Phillips was much more injured than Crosby's ever been. I mean, you hear about Crosby a lot, but like we discussed pre-show, he had 6-7 games he's missed in his entire career. The guy's just a warrior. He plays through everything. So I think the fact that they might just want to do right by the guy, he wants to play for a contender. I think that's about your only chance, is if the friendship between the two GMs and between Max and their ownership just want to give him a chance to get a ring and go to a contender. That's probably your only hope with that really working out. And the fact that maybe they're just going to have to take less, but that's a hard pill to swallow for them, especially to admit it 24 hours later and trade them for less. It's kind of hard to imagine that happening.
Yeah, I think if they do like a first and a third asking price, then the Eagles definitely have a chance. I just don't think, when I said a pipe dream, I just think it's more so if they want 2 first-round picks. I just don't see the Eagles. Yes, is Maxx Crosby a generational talent and would help this Super Bowl window stay open maybe a little bit longer? Because I think some of us may not want to realize it or admit it, but it could be closing sooner than we expect. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not going to make the playoffs, but eventually things come to an end, and we don't know what's going to happen with A.J. Brown. They got to make a decision with some of these other younger defenders on the defensive side of the ball. Jalen Hurts is going to be looking for a contract extension in the next year or two. So, adding Crosby would be great. If the price lowers, then I think they're going to go in, because there were reports that they were one of 3 teams that made an offer to Trey Hendrickson. So clearly they're not worried about the cap. They clearly have the money that they would have used for Jalen Phillips, and they're trying to allocate it elsewhere.